Hey, man. We're going to reconvene now. We will be doing Mr. Dubow and the tax bills. And anyone else you choose to sit with you, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Council President Clark and members of the committee. I'm Rob Dubow, Director of Finance. I'm here to testify on bills 160170 through 160176. I'm joined at the table by Frank Breslin, Revenue Commissioner, and Anna Adams, the Budget Director. While the administration strongly recommends the Council approve each of these bills, my remarks will be directed towards Bill 106176. That bill would authorize the imposition of a 3 cents per ounce tax on the distribution of sugary drinks to provide revenues for key initiatives that would promote education, safety, and economic opportunity for Philadelphians. When fully implemented, the tax would generate over $95 million annually. During the course of this process, several questions have appropriately been asked. Those questions include, why did the administration choose the sugary drinks tax? How did we project the revenue the sugary drinks tax would generate? And is the sugar drinks tax a stable source of revenue? I'll address each of those questions in this testimony. First, why a sugar drinks tax? The administration determined early on that the city's general fund did not have the resources to support three crucial initiatives: pre-K, community schools, and rebuilding community infrastructure. Those initiatives will combine to dramatically improve children's education and safety, as well as improve both the short and long-term economic health of our neighborhoods. In order to reap the benefits of these initiatives, however, the city will have to invest a substantial amount. By the time the three programs are fully implemented, they'll cost the general fund more than $95 million annually. At the same time, projected fund balances throughout the plan are much lower than the amounts recommended by the GFOA and are projected to get as low as under $38 million. Fund balances that low prevent the city from undertaking major new initiatives within its existing resources. Several options for generating the necessary revenue are not possible because of preemption by the state, and others would not generate the amount of revenue needed to support the initiatives. Given the city's current tax structure, it's plain that no existing tax would be an appropriate means of raising the recurring revenues necessary to realize these initiatives. The property tax has been increased 4 times in the last 5 years, so we didn't want to further increase the burden on households and businesses. Multiple studies and 2 commissions determined that cutting wage and business taxes are essential to creating jobs, and as Philadelphia is already lagging behind the nation in terms of job growth, we didn't want to halt those reductions. The business tax exemptions provide significant value to small businesses. In fact, if the business exemptions were eliminated, more than 65,000 businesses with $100,000 or less in Philadelphia revenues would return to the tax rolls. While some have expressed concern about the impact of the sugar drinks tax on jobs and small businesses, Wharton economist Robert Inman, among others, have found that the soda tax would have a far less adverse economic impact than increasing the wage, property, or gross receipts tax. Other taxes were so small that increases in them would have to be so substantial that they would likely have a dramatic negative impact. Reviewing the possibilities, we determined the sugar drinks tax at 3 cents would generate enough revenue to support expanded pre-K, community schools, and rebuilding community infrastructures, as well as contribute a small amount to our pension fund. It leads to the second question: which is how did we determine the amount of revenue that the tax would generate. After analyzing consumption data from the Rudd Center at the University of Connecticut, as well as the result of over a dozen studies on price elasticity of sugary drinks, we projected $95 million in annual revenue once the tax is fully implemented. We do expect the non-compliance rate to reduce over time as we've allocated $1.8 million in the Revenue Department's budget specifically for tax collection and auditing of this tax. We believe our projections are conservative on several counts. Our projections include an estimate of non-compliance of 10% in the first year with improvement over the 5 years. Our projections also assume that the entire tax will be passed on to the consumer, which experts believe is unlikely, given what we've seen in other areas where the tax has been implemented. That leads to the third question, which is whether this is a stable source of revenue. This is not the first time we've taxed consumables in such a way it's likely to reduce consumption. Both the liquor by the drink tax and cigarette tax were implemented to provide critical revenue for the school district, and both have provided necessary revenues. Liquor by the drink tax, in fact, has actually gone up over the last couple of years. The administration believes it's critical to provide recurring funding for pre-K community schools and the rebuilding community infrastructure initiatives. We also believe the sugar drinks tax is the best vehicle for providing that revenue. That concludes my testimony, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Getting this information about Mr. Inman, who you quote in your testimony.
Yes.
So I just want to bring your attention to an interview that he was doing. His Wharton Professor of Business Economics, Robert Inman, supports the proposal. He said in an interview that even though the tax is regressive, which has been said, and meaning that it takes a larger percentage from low-income people than high-income people, the benefits outweigh the cost of its regressiveness. First off, the benefits for the kids and adults in the long run would be in the health gains from the reduced consumption of sugary tax, would help to reduce obesity. I think we all agree on that. The results of drinking less sugary drinks, that is the country's healthcare costs, would also decline. So is that the basis for this tax? Or is it for the sustained revenue stream?
The basis for this tax?
Let me finish.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Because your reference to the liquor by the drink and cigarettes, first of all, the liquor by the drink increase in revenue is probably based on the significant number of restaurants that have happened over a period of time. And liquor is, if individuals have a propensity to having addiction issues, probably a little more than sugar. The cigarette, I don't know what we have to do to get people from smoking cigarettes, because every imaginable document has been out there to talk about the challenges associated with cigarettes. And I said even when I voted for the tax, people are not going to stop smoking cigarettes. So Mr. Inman's issue about basically saying that his support is based on making people stop drinking sugar. Is that your perspective?
Our perspective is that it generates revenue, and the primary consideration is the revenue it generates and the initiatives that it funds. We would obviously not argue that it doesn't create health benefits. We think it does, and health commissioners here and can talk to that, but our primary motivation is the revenue. The revenue.
So based on your reference to other revenue streams and actually other taxes that were imposed, the revenue stream continued throughout the process over a period of time. So it's anticipated that this revenue stream will continue.
Yes.
So there will not be a significant reduction in consumption.
So we built in a projection that there would be continuing small reductions in consumption, but the major reduction in consumption we project is in the first year when the tax is implemented.
Okay. So, but the other people will keep drinking it forever?
There will be people who will continue drinking, yes.
and where will they be? Where were those locations likely to be where people will continue to drink?
I think, that's one of the things that, we've talked about is that this is a tax that people don't have to pay if they don't buy it. So people who choose to continue purchasing it would pay
People
more.
will continue to drink it.
There will be people who continue to drink it, that's right.
And I'll ask you, where will the likely purchases be?
So, that will depend on kind of choices that people make. Also probably depends, it will depend on what choices people make about where they want to, if they want to buy it or not.
Geographically, is the likelihood that those people will continue to drink?
It looks like you have maps, and you want to show us where?
I asked this question early on in the budget process, and people said that they didn't know. Okay, so you know how I am, right? You say you don't know, I'm going to find out. I just want an acknowledgement that the consumption will primarily be in lower income neighborhoods. I don't know why that's that difficult to say.
Well, I think the reduction
Be
in
it marketing or be it whatever.
Yeah, it's also true that the reduction in consumption will be in low-income areas too. And the benefit of that reduction would also be in low-income areas.
Okay. All right. Okay, I just want to get it on the record. So you are agreeing that the consumption will be in lower income neighborhoods?
Well, and again, I'm going to go back to kind of what you said before. This is a tax that no one has to pay.
I'm not asking you about people's choices, Mr. Dubow. I'm asking you a simple question that basically your health commissioner came here and answered, but for some reason you guys won't answer that question. I'm just trying to understand. Why is that such a difficult question to answer?
Well, and it kind of goes back to what we're saying. It depends on what choices people make going forward.
Okay, well, where are the current locations that there is a significant amount of sugary drinks on sale?
So it looks like you've done an analysis that kind of shows where it is. That's what that map shows, I assume.
So if the current inventory of stores are in a particular neighborhood, do you expect them to somehow go to another area after the implementation of the program?
I don't know where they'll go. I know that there'll be a big fall off in consumption after this is implemented, and it will probably be in the areas where there's the highest level of consumption.
Which is where?
Based on that map, if that map's accurate, you can kind of see where it is there.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'm just, I'm giving you every opportunity to acknowledge, but that's one thing I've always said about you. I said a lot, mostly positive. Mr. Dubow is real good at budget hearings. He will rarely be pigeonholed even when the facts are clearly right before you. Yeah. You might decide one day to be a politician, because that's what we do.
I don't think so.
You don't want to do that?
No, I've seen what politicians have to go through. I don't want to go through that.
Yeah, let's see, you've been through, where'd you start, on the street, or was it?
Street, yeah.
Street, Nutter. Now,
yeah,
that's it.
up to my ankles in that.
I'm feeling you.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing sitting here. Right? I understand. All right. Let me get into one more, then I'll give up the mic for the minute. So, you also, and this came up before, referenced in various testimonies, and your health commissioner again was continuing to talk about Mexico as a reference. And would you acknowledge that that's not even close to apples and apples? It's not even close to apples and oranges. I say it's closer to apples and trees. I mean, Mexico is a state, it's a country, it's a country. So people are not going to drive across the border, particularly if Donald Trump gets elected.
They won't be able to come back.
Yeah, not to go with the panel truck and pick up sodas as is indicated if in fact this happened. So would you say that particular reference is really not appropriate?
So when we looked at studies. We looked at studies of impact of changes in cost. So the two places where we've seen the tax implemented are Mexico and Berkeley. But the analysis also was of kind of the impact of increases in soda cost in the kind of the broader studies that we looked at.
In Mexico?
Well, no, it was consumption, kind of the consumption analysis based on what happens with prices was broader than just that. But you're right that in terms of tax
Mexico
increases.
keeps getting referenced, and Berkeley is the other one.
Right, because those are the two that we have.
All right. So I'm wondering
But I understand what
why
you're
we would
saying,
use Mexico.
Because it's a place where they implemented the tax.
But it's different.
Yeah, I mean, every place is going to be different from here.
So that's the only one you have to use, basically.
That in Berkeley, and we also looked at the impact of just cost increases.
Berkeley,
And that was wider than just those two.
right. Berkeley, which is different.
Yes.
It's demographics, median household. Did Berkeley have a referendum?
They did.
So they voted to enact the tax. And that's
Yes.
a little different from here, too,
Correct.
where only 17 of us get to vote.
Right.
All right. Okay. I'm only bringing that because we continue to hear these references of other locations, and we always like to. I know in years past we've all been in government for a while. We try to find comparable cities, and we usually end up with, the northeastern cities that are somewhat comparable. All right. Okay. I'm going to give it up for now. I'll come back, sir. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I know we've talked about this before, but I'm still, I guess, slightly confused. And one of the statements you make is when you say that you don't believe that this will be passed on, or a lot of it will be passed on to the consumer, yet you factor in a 55% drop-off in consumption. Now, on the surface, that seems contradictory, and I'm trying to help me understand.
Right. We wanted our projections to be conservative, and we thought that was one way to be conservative. We don't think it'll all be passed on. If it was, that would be the impact.
Okay, but you're factoring that's a possibility. So then let me get into the whole issue of whether it's a sales tax or not. I mean, and again, I'm not a lawyer. I was going to ask the solicitor to come forward too, because I have a question that related to him. But I guess I'm trying to figure out if there is at least a reasonable assumption, at least some of it's passed on to the consumer, which would mean at the sale. Aren't we getting pretty close to a sales tax then?
So if that's the question, I am going to ask the solicitor to come up and answer that.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Sozi, Tulante, City Solicitor.
Yes.
Do you mind repeating your question?
I
Councilman
guess
Greenlee?
I might as well get into I was going to ask about your particular memorandum that you sent. And I'm not going to argue any legal cases here because I'm not.
You can if you want. Nobody be having fun if you do
Yeah,
that.
right. You know. I'll say I'm not equipped to do that, but I think I do understand this sentence. You say first when you say that you don't think it's, we call it a sales tax, you say there is no city intent that the tax will be borne by the consumer. Okay. But then nor is there any evidence that it will be borne by the consumer. So that gets me back to a question I asked Mr. Dubow. Isn't the evidence or part of the evidence that the administration is factoring in a considerable drop in consumption? Because I would think the only reason there would be that dramatic or could be that dramatic a drop is because of the price. I mean,
Yeah, and I think I'll echo what Mr. Dubow said in terms of the 55% drop. Mm-hmm. That's an assumption that they made for purposes of determining the revenue. It doesn't impact the legal analysis.
Okay, I'm sorry.
With respect to legal analysis, what we try to emphasize is that under long-settled Pennsylvania law, the Supreme Court will look at two things. What the incidence of the tax, so where is the tax being imposed, at what transaction, and two, what is the measure of the tax. And so with respect to that, I want to sort of emphasize that The tax that's being imposed is on the transaction between the distributor and the retailer. When I say there's no intent that it be passed on, there's nothing in the legislation as written that requires that the distributor pass it on to the retailer and pass it on to the consumer. Mm-hmm. If they choose to, that's their choice, but it doesn't actually change that into a sales tax. If it did require that, that would be different. Okay. Right? They make a business decision. In other words, you don't determine whether it's a sales tax based on what the distributor does with it. So if one distributor passes it on, it doesn't become a sales tax, and one doesn't, then it's not a sales tax. You have to look at the ordinance as a whole. And so that's what we try to emphasize with that.
I understand. It just seems that when you're making certainly assumptions that it's going to get passed on, you're getting closer.
Yeah, and I'm not bound to Mr. Dubow's assumptions. I mean, I know they did that for
luckily for him.
Okay.
And I know
that's
they did that for
a good move on your part.
Yeah, and they try to be conservative in terms of determining, but that's an assumption they make for revenue purposes. We're certainly not going to argue that in court if this were to go forward.
All right. But speaking about arguing court, it's been made pretty clear by the industry that if there's any kind of soda tax, sugar sweetened beverage tax, they're going to go to court. And I guess Mr. Bowe, this question is for you. Obviously, if the court, or I guess either one of you, if there is, we're not talking about something that's going to be settled in a week. That will probably go on. Whoever loses at the first level will probably appeal to the next level.
That's right.
So the reason I said maybe Mr. Bowe can answer this, what happens in the meantime to the programs that we're trying to fund with this?
So I think before I answer that, it would be helpful if you talked about the timeline.
We think what will if you remember, the legislation doesn't go into effect until January 1st, 2017. Mm-hmm. So assuming it passes and that it's signed into law by the mayor in July, we think any action will occur in those 6 months. And the first level, which is like in the Court of Common Pleas, should go pretty quickly. And we're pretty confident that based on the argument we set forward, that the city will prevail. And then any appeal may take some time, but we think there will be no legal impediment if we win in the Court of Common Pleas for Mr. Dubow to enact whatever he wants to do. And that's his choice. But in terms of legally, right? We would think there would be no obstacle to do.
But the Common Pleas Court's the first level, so
that's right. So
and that's where and we Commonwealth think that, and Supreme, right?
Yes, and we think that will happen pretty quickly. And by quickly, I mean it could take a month. Maybe a month and a half, but I think it's everyone's interest to have that resolved, both the businesses and the city, before January 1st, 2017, so that you know where you stand.
So you think any appeal level could be all settled by that time?
No, not appeal, but the Court of Common Pleas. The appeals will. I
guess that's where I'm going. But you're saying the whole thing, Commonwealth and Supreme, you think could get done by January 1st?
No, I'm saying the Court of Common Pleas, the trial level. Right, and we think that there will be no injunction at that point, meaning that there will be no legal bar for us to collect any taxes while the pendency of the appeal. Okay. And we don't want it to go too quickly in terms of we want the court to get it right. And I think the beverage industry probably feels the same way.
I guess playing devil's advocate, though, aren't you taking a real calculated risk to start collecting something that could get thrown out in court?
Well, that's why I would advise Mr. Dubow, if we win in the trial court, we're likely to continue to prevail because that's typically what occurs. But I would advise him, that, if we have the legal authority, he can go ahead and do it, and that's his decision going forward.
No, I got you. So you're saying most Common Pleas Court decisions are upheld in appeals?
Yeah, particularly based on the record that's made, and also based on the analysis that we've done, we think that we'll be able to prevail. We've examined the arguments. We've done this for 4 or 5 years. I mean, I've only been here 4 months, but sort of examine what we've done.
In fairness, though, the other side's been analyzing this.
I know they have.
All right. Okay.
Cal, real quick.
Yeah.
Isn't there a provision in the bill that if litigated, the responsibility of the tax falls onto the retailer?
No, the way it's set up is there's an aspect of the bill that if a licensed distributor, if there's a court of competent jurisdiction determines that a licensed distributor is not liable for the tax, then and only then in that circumstance would it fall on the retailer.
That's what I just asked you.
Yeah, but I'm trying to. But in only very narrow circumstances.
Okay. So my question was maybe because sometimes me and you, I know
we're trying to work it out.
Thrust. It's all good. It's all good. And you, by the way, you're doing a good job.
Thank you.
Is there a provision in the bill that in the event that there is litigation and there might be some concerns about trying to enforce the tax the whole 9 yards, that it will then be the responsibility of the retailer?
Yeah, and I just read it if you don't mind, because.
Okay, that's fine.
Just to be,
Yeah, that's
just
what
to
I
be
make sure.
clear. As in the event a court of competent jurisdiction rules in a decision from which no further appeals, so all appeals have been exhausted, that a licensed distributor is not liable to the city for the tax with respect to any transaction or class of transactions, then the dealer, which is a retailer, to which the licensed distributor supplied the beverage associated with transactions shall be liable to the city
Okay.
for the tax. So
All right.
that's
Okay, so
what you know.
we agree.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Councilman. You done?
Do I get to leave, or you want me to stay for all the legal stuff? I'm here, so if you want me.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, let me give context to what I'm about to ask you. I ask you a series of questions. You may remember, it was all over the media, there was maybe 11 murders in the city of Philadelphia about a month and a half ago. If you narrow down to where those murders were, it was probably 11 zip codes they happened in. And for me, and I learned this from Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, mapping is important. If you look at those 11 zip codes, that's probably where the highest impact of where you're talking about being the corner stores being impacted, the Pepsi not being able to be distributed in that area. I remember sitting at one of those tables of one of those 11 victims. And it comes to my mind that there was a younger brother of the victim sitting at a table. And because of the hectic nature of what was going on, they got him some fast food. I think it might have been Kentucky Fried 2-piece and a biscuit, along with his, I don't even know if it was Pepsi or Coke. It was a soda though. And I thought about this argument that's being waged now about saving that little man's Pepsi. But the problem I have, this one-sided kind of debate about this, is that when that kid gets up after he buries his brother, he's going to walk down the street to a rec center that he can't go into. He's going to not be able to join a baseball team, football team, soccer club because we don't have the facilities. So is there other ways to raise this revenue to solve that? Because number one, at the end of the day, we are going to solve that issue. I'm going to tell you this, that when I talk about maps, that same 11 zip codes occupies about 80% of the inmates on State Road. What they have in common? Lack of education. And as I understand the mayor's proposal, it starts with pre-K. 20,000 people proposed to be on pre-K. I think we have 7,500 residents of State Road, just maybe, had some of them got a little pre-K. They might have been able to read at the point of 4th grade so that they didn't have to go that journey. So as we start to look at this debate, and I do not want to put anybody out of business, I do not want to put some of the good workers that work for them out of jobs, but I did not hear one person from the beverage industry at any of those funerals saying what the solutions would be. So as we debate Coke versus Pepsi, 3 versus 2, 1, I better hear an answer to that question in my community. So if we don't get it from there, where are we getting it from? And how much, so the questions I have, that was a statement. How much in those 11 zip codes are there increases in social service costs? You don't know. If you know, I will get up and walk away. If you know that answer.
36%.
So my point is, the correlation I want you to research.
No, I understand.
From
yes.
those 11 zip codes, tell me how much more we pay in DHS.
Right.
Tell me how much it costs more to incarcerate. I want to see.
Yeah, the serious answer is if you map after map you look of it, the city shows the same concentration of things But you're
Bad
talking about
outcomes
bad
will
outcomes in those same zip codes.
So if you do that same map, the diabetes map that convinced me to go with menu labeling, they're going to come from those same zip codes because there are food deserts there now. If you go by that same thing, diabetes, kidney failure, hypertension, and all of those things are concentrated in that same map. So, yeah, I'm for saving those jobs, and yeah, I'm for saving Pepsi and Coke, but I'm damn sure for saving those kids, and you need to tell me how and how we pay for it. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, administration.
Good afternoon.
First, I need clarity on a question that was raised earlier. Should this measure become law, where will these dollars go? Let me not answer the question in asking it. A separate pot or the general fund?
Into the general fund. And to fund, I mean, if the question, what will it fund? Also, it's pre-K, community schools, rebuilding community infrastructure, the investment in parks, libraries, and rec centers, and a little bit into pensions.
And that entity in government, which will be the watchdog, if you will, or the police officer for X number of dollars being collected because of this tax, will be whom?
That would be the Revenue Department would be collecting the tax.
Okay. Earlier on in the budget hearings, I had requested, and I know that Councilwoman Blackwell and I requested of the commission, possible alternative measures of getting to this goal. And so with that said, did the administration ever consider, I should say that my office did some homework on alternative measures, and so the question is, did the administration ever consider a beverage container tax similar to the one implemented by the city of Baltimore?
So we did take a look at that. It didn't generate as much revenue. I don't remember the exact number, but we did take a look at that.
And let's go with the upside of that idea. What pluses did you find in the homework done on that?
So when we looked at it and it didn't generate enough revenue, we moved on. We didn't look at anything beyond the revenue because the revenue wasn't that big.
Okay, so let me say for the record why my office is looking closely at this. This tax levied on distributors placed a 5-cent tax on non-reusable beverage containers, such as canned soda, diet soda, takeaway bottles, cans of beer, energy drinks, teas, water, flavored water, and carbonated beverages such as Perrier. In your research of best practices, how much focus, well, you just told me, your team did not look further because it didn't generate the dollars required for this measure.
And we can get you the numbers that we calculated that it would generate.
That would be extremely helpful. Last question.
And sorry, Councilwoman, and I guess it would be important for us to see kind of what you're saying it's on to make sure that we were using the same universe of containers.
Sure. If the goal of any tax is to produce a sustainable source of revenue and to be the least regressive possible, would not a tax that includes a broader base of products spread out amongst a wider universe of consumers be more preferable?
So we saw kind of the big, if the question is about the fall off, we saw the big fall off kind of in the first year, and then some small fall after that, but not a big fall off annually after the first year. For the sugar-sweetened beverage tax.
Restate that.
So our projection is that there's a big fall off in the first year, and then relatively small fall offs in the years after that. But part of your question was what the fall off would be in future years.
So if that be a possible outcome, how will we then be able to fund the Parks and Rec and Universal Pre-K going forward if you anticipate fall off?
Yeah, we built that into our projections. So even with that fall off, we hit the numbers in our projections.
I see. So we would appreciate, my office and members that are on that team would appreciate the numbers that you discovered in your research.
And it probably makes sense for us to talk to whoever is appropriate in your office to make sure that we're talking about the same universe on the container tax.
Okay. All right then. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman, we have a quorum. I didn't have a chance to speak to all of the members about what I'm getting ready to do. I would like to offer an amendment to the budget, reflects the language that was in the transfer ordinance that I introduced last Thursday. There were some issues in the transfer ordinance that would ultimately become a part of the budget. So what I would like to do is go into the public meeting to introduce but not vote on that amendment and offer that amendment as a part of the budget discussions. Is that okay with members? Yeah. So with that, and that amendment should have been circulated. Basically, the amendment reflects the $2 million that was a part of the transfer ordinance that would have increased the number of employees in the, what's the name of that unit? The special projects unit. That's the unit within the Department of Recreation that does capital projects throughout the departments, and my understanding does a very good job. The thought is if we can increase that number, we would not only have an internal workforce that can do capital projects, but also that internal workforce would also reflect the diversity of the city, as does the City of Philadelphia's workforce, which was one of the issues that was raised during the course of these conversations. And there's also, my good friend Councilman Jones just gave me the thumbs up, there's also $500,000 transfer ordinance from prisons to the Office of Housing and Community Development, so we can continue the proposal that allowed us to hire returning citizens, and we had a very successful event allowing PHS to hire those individuals to give them second chances, but more importantly, an actual job, so we can ensure that that second chance continues to keep them out of the system. So with that, I would like to go into public meeting, and I would like to recognize Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
I would like to offer amendments to the operating budget on your behalf, but I will not ask for a vote. Let me repeat that. We will not ask for a vote on them at this time. The purpose is to get them introduced and make them a part of the record. I defer to you to make any comments, as you've already done, on the substance of the amendment themselves, period.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Council. Does everyone have copies of the amendments?
Yes.
All right, the script says I make my comments, but I already did that. We will now recess the public hearing and go to the public meeting, and the chair again recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. I offer proposed amendments to Bill Number 160172 and request that no vote be taken at them on this time.
Thank you. Very well, we will see that the stenographer gets a copy of both amendments so that they may be made as a part of the record. Thank you all for your support on that very important measure at some point. We will now go back into our public hearing.
And Mr. President, I actually had like 2.5 minutes left.
Absolutely. You know what, Councilwoman? My clock says you have 5 minutes left. Okay,
Thank you very much. So, we learned early on that Mexico and Berkeley were the test models, if you will, of this measure. I learned, and my staff and I, it's never I, so we think. My staff and I learned later that Arkansas and West Virginia also tried this, but are now in an appeal process. So if our city solicitor could return to the witness table and help us understand why you believe, based on your opinion, we would not end up in a similar circumstance.
Good afternoon, Councilwoman Reynolds
Good afternoon.
I have to start by pledging ignorance with respect to Arkansas and was it West Virginia?
Yes.
I'm not aware of the litigation or
Okay.
the outcome of that. My opinion to you and to this body is simply that based on the analysis that we've made, that if there was litigation certainly at the Court of Common Pleas level, which is the most important because it will determine whether or not the first instance, whether we can go forward, even if without appeals, that we think we would prevail.
That you what?
That we think we would prevail. And now what I can do, I can look at those two states and those two sorts of litigation and analyze and come back to you, and I'm happy to brief you, just because I want to make sure you're fully comforted with my opinion. So I hadn't evaluated that.
No problem at all. No problem at all. What I've learned is that looking at other cities and or states to see where efforts or initiatives have been tested sometimes can inform
Absolutely.
us and what we should do and how we should do it.
And what I've done is I've reached out to Berkeley. I talked to the city attorney to get a sense of what litigation they had, and they didn't have much litigation, and some of the same arguments being raised here. And I recognize that they're different city, as the council
Apples
president
and
noted.
oranges they are.
Apples and pears, if you will. But they're very, very different. But I was comforted by the fact that some of the same arguments with respect to whether or not, because Berkeley doesn't have the authority to impose a sales tax, so they had to be aware of that. But there was no litigation regarding that. So I was a little bit comforted by that, again, recognizing that they're different.
Sure.
But I would look at the two,
Sure.
if I can talk to your staff, figure out
That
those
would be
two
very,
states,
very,
I'll do
very
that.
helpful. Follow up on my last question with regards to Baltimore. Mr. Rob Dubow, when you all examined the numbers, ran the numbers for the container tax, what rate did you use per container for your revenue projections? How much per container?
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah, but we'll get all that to you.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kiona Sanchez.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to focus in on the part of your presentation where you say the administration determined early on that the city's general fund did not have the resources to support these crucial initiatives. Can you describe what process, you've been through several administrations, what departmental reviews were done to determine that there was no general fund money to support?
Sure. So, in the budget process, we look at every department's budget. We meet with every department, so we get a good sense of kind of what's in there, what kind of room they do or don't have. So it's really, it's a matter of going through every department's budget.
So every single department realigned its budget priorities based on the new mayor's priorities.
So, and I should also say that we asked departments for cuts and kind of looked at the impact of those cuts, and some of those are included in the budget too.
So let me ask the question directly.
Yeah.
Did departments realign their budgets based on the priorities of the new mayor?
So for most departments, a lot of what they do is not going to change. Like the streets department, for example, still going to be collecting trash, right? So for departments where it was kind of appropriate for realignment of priorities, that happened through the budget process. For a lot of departments, you don't see that, that kind of change. Like fire department, for example, they're still fighting fires, and so the level of resources
But the mayor made a priority that there will be no more rotations, so there was a reprioritizing of the fire department's budget. Just because you used it as an example, there was a prioritizing within the budget that because there will be no more rotations and blackouts, brownouts, whatever. What did that cost? So that's a realignment. That's what I'm talking about. So you mean to tell, so every department does have a focus based on the mayor's priority.
They do, but I guess what I was trying to say is in terms of looking at their need for resources, there are certain things that they have to do.
So in a $4 billion plan, you're telling me that they're all of the departments reprioritize based on the budget priorities, and there's no general operating funds to absorb the initiation of these critical
What I'm telling you is that there's not $95 million worth of room, and
That's
that,
not what you need in the beginning.
and that there were other items that were funded in the budget, and those items we used savings from departments to fund. So, for example, cameras, video cameras, that was a new expense.
Body cameras.
Body cameras, sorry, body cameras for police officers. That was a new expense. That was something that required more resources that we found within the budget. So there were a number of new initiatives funded within the budget. For these major initiatives at this scale, it was not possible to fund them out of the budget.
So based on your proposal for the first year, I'm just dealing with the first year, it's $27 million pre-K, $7 million community schools, and $12 million to pay for the first $100 million bond, right? That's $54 million.
The first year is about 48. So, yes.
I'm rounding off, I'm giving you extra credit. And rounding off, you mean to tell me then in your $4 billion general operating plan, there is not $54 million to initiate these?
No, there is not. There isn't. It's not.
In any department that deals with early childhood intervention, that deals with safety net programs. So in our safety net programs, your testimony is that there's not $54 million to begin this.
That's correct.
Okay. So I'm going to hold you to that because remember, I get the appropriations transfer ordinances.
Yes.
And
Yep.
we'll have this conversation again.
Okay.
Okay. You make the statement that choices people make. What other choices in those outlines of those grocery stores do people have?
So there are diet sodas, there's water, there are other
There's
things.
only those two. Let's be clear. Every single natural juice has sugar.
No, those natural, the juice in natural, the sugar, natural sugar in juices is not taxable. So orange juice, for example, not taxable.
Are you sure? Because
Yes.
we keep going back and forth on
I'm
that.
sure, and I mean, if we want the city solicitor to come up and say that, you can have him come up.
So, because coconut water has sugar.
Coconut, if sugar is added, if sugar is added, it's taxable. If it's natural sugar, it's not. So apple juice, for example,
So
not taxable.
can you provide for us what you consider as you define the choices people make? What items are exempt from this? Can we get a list? We don't need to go through it now.
Okay, it's actually, it's in the ordinance, but yes.
Okay. So have we asked the school district what the impact of this will be for them, since many of their school juices? Or is everything that the school districts serve exempt?
I don't know the extent to which they
So we have
serve
not asked the
sugar-sweetened
school
beverage, have not had that
Okay.
conversation.
Have we asked the Philadelphia Corporation of Aging that feeds our seniors what the impact is on their budget for our feeding programs?
On their budget. Again, I don't know what kind of beverages they serve, not had that
Okay,
conversation.
so on Friday, I was at Norris Square Senior Center providing a resolution for you for press speak, and there was not one item that was being served to our seniors that would be exempt from this. So I think it would be important for us as we feed people through our feeding programs, our seniors in our schools, that we get a clarification as to what budgetary impacts.
Yep, and to what they're serving. But I think the health commissioner has.
Can I wait just for a second? I'm Tom Farley, I'm the health commissioner. The exempted from the tax would be milk, would be water, and would be any fruit juice that's 100% fruit juice. In general, in school, that's what they're serving children, milk, water, 100% fruit juice. They're not generally serving sugary drinks. I don't know the Philadelphia school system well enough to know for sure if there are any, but it would be a very small fraction if it were.
I just wanted to clarify, particularly in our senior centers too, because there was not any at the senior center that I went to on Friday.
There was no water?
Of course there's water.
Okay. Thank you.
We're talking about, your statement is people make choices. I'm talking about people who don't make choices because they're being served something that we subsidize as government. I just want the verification that we did our due diligence and we know what the budgetary impacts are for the people we're feeding. We have a summer lunch program. How does that impact our summer lunch program? My time is up. I'll wait for my next round.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So, as I understand it, the goal is better education that leads to greater ability to have a better job with more opportunities for each person to realize a more full potential, and that pre-K is a pathway to this goal. There are a number of things that I would like to have by the time I have to make a decision, because I'm already predisposed to vote against the soda tax, but I want to be open-minded about it. But what I would like is an economic impact study, and I would like to have some type of outcome analysis of the pre-K program. So the first thing I'm not clear on.
I think
Yeah.
that should probably ask Otis Hackney to come up for your questions about the pre-K program. Or you have questions about the pre-K program? Is that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I will have that. But you know what, in my limited time, being that I don't think we're going to get this whole discussion done today, I'd kind of just like to outline.
Councilman, not to cut you off, I'll add your time. So we have pre-K coming up after revenue, so if you want,
You want to wait? Okay.
Yeah,
it might be better for
Yeah,
you to get
sure.
more specific questions relating to the individuals who'll be,
yes, thank you.
so you can use your time, and I know you got a bunch of other stuff.
No, thank you, I couldn't have said it better myself. So, in other words, in the way and balance of making this choice, I like to know, soda appears to me oddly to be the hub of a spoke of a wheel, that somehow the revenues of soda support a number of things, from Chuck E. Cheese to movie theaters, to McDonald's, to corner stores, to convenience stores in neighborhoods where they otherwise would not be. And there's kind of a ancillary effect to the economy that I'd like to better understand. So if soda goes up by a certain percentage, or the cost goes up, and people go to Delaware County, Bucks County, to Costco, or to wherever they go, or they go to the movie theater in Plymouth Meeting rather than Philadelphia, you know, what is the economic impact versus the kind of revenues that you believe you are trying to obtain? And I'd like a credible impact study. The other study that I'd like to know, which we could get into later, is exactly what is the pre-K plan, and I don't need the details right now, but my question is, my kids don't go to pre-K because I'm fortunate to have a stay-at-home wife who watches them. If we were both highly paid professionals and we could afford better pre-K than my wife and I could present at home, we would. It would be pretty expensive, I think. If we were poorer than we are, then we'd have available to us pre-K now, because we're unable to afford, and we get free pre-K if we're below a certain level. So I know this is not universal pre-K. It's not universal in the sense that everybody of every income level all over Philadelphia will be eligible for this pre-K. So I know that. So we're going to try to understand what group of people are we targeting, number one, and number two, what is the curriculum? If there is a curriculum and it's before kindergarten, and the last I heard we were trying to put money into the schools for K to 4. But this money is not going to the schools, it's not going to certified teachers. And I'd like to know if there were the best daycare in Southwest Philadelphia, in North Philadelphia, or any of our neighborhoods that are challenged with poverty, could you show me that excellent pre-K and a poorly performing elementary school and high school then leads to high school graduation rates, college graduation rates? In other words, how is it that providing a kind of a daycare or pre-K, which is not Head Start, it's not administered by the schools, how does that initial process affect the outcome if we don't improve our public schools? And then in terms of the health issue, I'd like to understand why we are charging $25 when you're caught with an ounce of marijuana, and then we're going to charge you more for your choice in using sodas or sports drinks. In other words, I understand the reason why it's there, you know, the criminal justice and all that, but I don't understand if you're trying to discourage through increasing prices and taxation poor health choices, why would you lower the penalty for an illegal substance that was damaging to your mind and body? So, you know, I need to understand those things as clearly, and I've challenged the soda industry, by the way. I said, listen, you coming around knocking on my door all the time with nothing in your hand that I could use does not help the case. You know how I voted last time, but I'd like an economic impact study. I'd like some facts and figures, something I could hang my hat on to understand what are my choices.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just going to move over for 1 second.
You want to be over there?
Yeah, I have a situation.
It's okay, look.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I have a couple of questions, and...
Councilman, hold on a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, you're good.
Okay, thank you. So I have a couple of questions. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So my biggest concern, and I've expressed this before, is that we're really looking at what I consider an unstable funding stream to be able to do something that's so very important, and that really would lift all of our children here in Philadelphia and make a huge impact on the city that we want to be in the future. And so the idea that we would fund early childhood education on a funding stream that in so many ways seems to be so unstable, I can't think of any department that would line up and say, you know, oh, fund me on, you know, sugary drink tax. I think that that's a great way to go. Fund me on something that, you know, is expected to be a declining source of revenue. And so just knowing that, you know, we do the best we can, but in the past we have gotten some things wrong. I think you would agree. And
What?
so, well, let me let you know. I'll be happy to let you know. Why don't we start with AVI? And so, you know, we did AVI. We thought we
Right.
had these numbers that were dead on, and then we had to go through a huge reassessment. And so,
So I'd say on AVI, if we're at that,
Okay.
That the assessments are much more accurate than they were before. There is still work to do. I agree with that. But
I
I
would
think
agree.
the purpose of AVI, which was to make those assessments much more accurate, I think that was achieved, but there's continuing work that has to happen.
I think so, but I think the idea was to get it right the first time, and that's the point that I'm making.
Yeah, and I don't
with-
think we would have said that we're going to get all 570,000
Not
properties
all,
right the first
but that
time.
we would primarily have
Yeah, and I
a
think,
better system, and that we wouldn't be looking at doing this all over again within a few years.
Yeah,
Not
so-
all over again, but
No.
the point that I'm trying to make here is that we put our best efforts forward, but we know that we're not always spot on the numbers, and that was the case with AVI. And so when we're making such a critical decision, I guess I have a lot of concern that we are not accurate in determining how much money we're going to be able to get. We know that this funding stream is going to be declining, and it even feels, when you look at the map in terms of where the consumption is, you know, it even in some ways feels a little bit predatory, because we know that in poor neighborhoods, that's where the consumption really is.
So when we did, one of the questions we had earlier was why, if we don't think all the cost is going to be passed on, did we assume a reduction as though it was? And part of it is we wanted to be conservative in our projections so that if we were off, it would be more likely that we would be off, that we were coming in higher rather than lower. Mm-hmm. Because there always is a risk with any revenue projection. Any revenue projection, the reality is going to come in different from your projection. And so the idea is to try to be conservative, particularly with the new revenue. So, and that's what we tried to do with this.
Even with being conservative, I can tell you that as the new chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, one of the things that we'd like to do is to reduce consumption, but doing it through a way that makes a more informed and educated consumer about the choices that they make, but overall, looking out for the health of our citizens. And so if we're going to continue to push on making sure that people know what they're buying, know what it does, know what the effects and outcomes would be of purchasing soda versus water versus, a different type of beverage, this is a declining revenue stream. This is something that we expect will go down. So this is something that we are hopeful will go down, and yet we're funding something so very important.
And we built that into that decline into our projections. And so we get to the numbers we get to assuming a decline.
I think that you built in some assumption of declining revenue, but I don't think that, looking at a larger push that I think that the Health and Human Services Committee should do here for our citizens in terms of making sure that people understand what it is that sugary beverages does to them, what their options are, making sure that we have a more informed and educated and therefore healthier citizenry. I just think it's something that we have to do. We have such a disconnect in terms of health and the connection to health care here in the city of Philadelphia, that this is something that's critically important when you look at diabetes, and I know that, Councilwoman Brown has done a lot of work on that in the past. And how can we, on the one hand say we want consumption to go down, but we want it to go down to a point where it levels off so that we can pay for early childhood education. I just think that the theory doesn't really stand.
Yeah. And we're talking about, a 55% reduction, so a really substantial reduction.
Talking about 55%, okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Real quick, the Rudd Center.
Yes.
You use the Rudd Center for revenue?
Yeah. Do you want to talk through that, or should Marissa? Yeah, so we're going to ask.
You did?
Yes.
Did you use them for consumption reduction?
So I'm going to ask Marissa to come up, and she's the one who knows the methodology best.
Okay. Sorry to cut in. Just want to follow up on the question about consumption. It seems like the Rudd Center's analysis on reduction in consumption is different than the administration's reduction in consumption, but yet you use the Rudd Center for revenue sources. Right.
Hi, Marissa Waxman, First Deputy Revenue Commissioner. So we looked at a variety of sources to make sure that we understood all the different pieces that you need to produce the revenue projection. So the things you need...
From the Rudd Center, right?
From a variety of sources, so I can quickly bank through which ones came from where.
So you didn't use the Rudd Center?
We used it for some. So what you need to know is consumption, how much are folks drinking now. You need to understand what is the current price of soda in the city of Philadelphia and where folks are getting it. You need to understand the price elasticity, which is how people are going to, or how a change in price is going to affect consumption, as well as some other features such as general trends towards reducing consumption.
So, thank you. Because I'm cutting in on other
Okay,
people's
I'll go.
time. So
We use the Rudd Center data for the baseline consumption, what folks are drinking now.
And that determined your estimates on revenue.
It was one of several factors that you use to determine the revenue. So that the other items I mentioned are the other things. Each one of those affects what the final revenue projection is. The consumption, the elasticity, the price of the tax, the price before the tax.
Did you use the Rudd Center for your consumption
For consumption
drop-off?
data, correct.
Use that also?
I'm sorry?
Rudd Center, did you use their analysis for the consumption drop-off?
So what we
Because their
used-
numbers are
so-
significantly different than yours.
Yeah, so what we used is actually, we looked at a variety of studies. They also looked at, there's one that's a meta-analysis of 13 different studies. That's what they're based on. That's what ours also looked at, as well as a variety of other things that came out in 2013. That found a range of -0.8 to -1.21 in the price elasticity.
So you picked a number of different studies to
We looked
get
at a
to where
bunch
you
of-
needed to get to.
Yeah, so we looked at a variety of different sources, as well as also looking at some
All
of
right,
the
all right.
impacts that occurred later.
All right, okay. We do that sometime. I do that a lot. You know, I kind of pick, I like that over there. I'm going to use that.
It was a
Okay.
little more rigorous than that, sir.
I'm just basing it on what, I'm seeing a significant difference. It's like 95 in the administrations, and the Rudd Center is 71 for 3 cents.
Yeah, so the range is the -0.8 to the -1.21. They used all the way at the -1.21.
Okay.
We used within the range at -1.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm sorry. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. If City Solicitor could come to the table. Councilman Green was asking some questions from the legal perspective in reference to the sugar tax or soda tax, however people want to describe the initiative. And it seems like the two main issues are regarding preemption and uniformity. And so from my understanding is that, looking at the seminal case of United Tavern Owners, the issue is in reference to preemption is whether the intent of the tax is going to be borne on the consumer or not. And my understanding that from the city's perspective, because the intent of the tax will not be borne on the consumer, the city does not believe will be preempted. However, other parties believe that it would be preempted.
Yeah, and just to briefly talk about that case, I promised I wouldn't talk about cases, but you brought it up, so I want to just focus on that. The issue in that case was whether or not the municipality of Philadelphia could tax liquor. And the Supreme Court in the 3-2 decision determined that in that case, there were actually two separate taxes on liquor. There was a 6% tax as well as an 18% tax. And on top of that, as everyone in this body knows, liquor is very different because it's heavily regulated by the state. And in this particular instance, there's no specific tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. There's a sales tax that's generally applicable, but there's no 18% tax, and there's no heavy regulation of sugar-sweetened beverages by the state. So based on that, and among other things, we thought that wasn't applicable. I know I received, I think it was a 4 or 5 page unsigned memorandum by the beverage industry, and they made some points, and I'm sure they may make it if there's any litigation, but we didn't find that convincing at all.
And so basically, you don't feel that the Commonwealth occupies a field in reference to this type of taxation regarding sugar?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the other question I have is in reference to uniformity, and this is the one I need a little more clarity because there's some perspective on whether the tax does or does not violate the uniformity clause at the state level. So if you can give me some of the state constitution, so if you can give me some perspective on that.
Yeah, the issue with respect to that is whether or not the distinction that this council draw between sugar-sweetened beverages and other forms of beverages, so I just use diet soda as an example, whether or not that's rational. And under the uniformity clause as interpreted by our state courts, council has there's a lot of deference given to the legislature, whether it's state and local, and in this case there has to be a rational basis. In other words, there has to be a reason why, when you draw that line, why you put some products on this side of the line, i.e. it's taxed, other ones that on the other side. And in this particular case, given and I'm glad Dr. Farley's here, that the health deficits associated with sugar-sweetened beverages, that is their relationship to obesity and to heart ailments, that it's rational. If there's litigation, we go to litigation, we'll be able to present that there's a body of evidence that shows the health effects, and that's an appropriate place for council to draw that line. And so, and there's evidence in the record with respect to that.
And it's based on that rationality argument why you don't feel it violates the uniformity clause of the state constitution.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Based on that rationality aspect, you're saying that why you believe it does not violate the uniformity clause.
That's right.
Okay. All right.
And again, Councilman, this is There are no guarantees. I was going to make clear. There's no 100%. If somebody's going to ask me that, I don't want to preempt that question. But that's where we stand, and we feel that this body has the authority to enact it if it so chooses to.
And it is the position of the administration that if this legislation was enacted, and I think it would go into effect in January, and if the litigation is not resolved, will they still be collecting the revenue from the tax?
I would suggest that if there's no legal barrier, that's a decision that the finance director will have to make to determine whether to collect.
Okay, well, let me ask this question to Mr. Dubow. If there's litigation, and I'm sure there'll be litigation, the legislation does get passed, and the legislation would go into effect, I believe, as of January, and that litigation is not resolved by January of next year, would the city then be collecting the tax?
So based on what the solicitor said in his earlier answer, which is he was confident that Common Pleas Court would have ruled by January and would have ruled favorably, we would go ahead. If there's no Common Pleas Court ruling by then, I don't think we would move ahead.
But even with, so you're saying that the initial jurisdiction would be in Common Pleas Court, not Commonwealth Court?
I'm sorry, Councilman. I'm having Councilman Quinones is blocking your. I can't read your lips. I apologize.
So the first tier court you're saying is going to be Common Pleas and not Commonwealth?
It'll be Common Pleas Court. That's correct.
Because of the nature of this legislation, and from those who would oppose the legislation, this would be a very challenging perspective if this legislation would go into effect. So you believe that even if it made it through Court of Common Pleas, and I'm sure there'll be multiple appeals, that we still should collect the tax?
I would recommend that he should collect it because his appeals may take some time, and so long as there's no legal impediment, in other words, at the Court of Common Pleas level, that we prevail, and I'm confident that we will.
Okay, because I just think there's going to be a number of appeals, and even though the city may win at the initial level, concerns that with all the various appeals that may occur, there still may be some impediments in reference to the full nature of the collection of the tax.
Yes, I mean, if we prevail, I can tell you this, that we're pretty confident that the Court of Common Pleas litigation will be resolved by January 1st. There will be appeals after that, and if that's the case and we win, I would recommend to the finance director that he can go ahead, if he chooses, to collect on the tax.
Well, let me drill down a little bit more on that. So legislation gets passed, action is filed, and you're pretty confident that it'll be resolved prior to January?
That's correct.
Even with, if I was representing the other side, it's going to be a multitude of motions and all types of process issues and procedural issues, and you think that'll all be resolved by January?
Yeah, and historically what we found that in cases like this where there are essentially legal issues and that there's an interest by both sides for expedited review, that could be resolved by January 1st, because that gives us 6 months between the enactment of the legislation and when there's any collection, which will be on January 1st.
And you believe both sides will have a desire for an expedited?
Well, we'll ask the court. I think there'll be certainly in the court's interest for expedited review.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm sure we're just so many of us being repetitive in our ways. We know that we're not assured of what's going to happen in future years with funding just kindergarten through 12th grade. And yet we know we're 34,000 seats short pre-K right now. So what happens if we were to find a way to fund this? What happens next year, and how do we relate that to K to 12? What do we do then? What is your administration's suggestions as to how we get through in the future?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question. Sorry.
Seats short of pre-K now. And we don't have even K through 12 straight after this year. what do we do in future years? How do we get through? And what's your proposal for us to not have shortages, to be able to fund on both levels in the future?
Do you want us to do that now or during the pre-K portion later? And I'll call up Otis if we want to talk about the plan for pre-K going forward.
It's the Councilwoman's choice.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Otis Hackney, Chief Education Officer, Mayor's Office. Councilwoman, can you repeat your question, please?
Yes, sir. We're trying to fund pre-K now. We're 34,000 seats short that we're aware of. What do we do in the future? How do we fund K to 12? We're going to need more funding. We're not assured of even 5 years funding from K to 12. What are we going to do with pre-K? How do we fund K-12? Where are we supposed to get all these additional funding dollars? What are your plans?
Well, I mean, I think thank you for the question, but I think when we're talking about two different issues in terms of how do we fund the pre-K, and I think that's, what we're here debating or discussing today.
Now, you all don't know. You don't have to answer it, but you can't say that funding education doesn't have anything to do with pre-K. Give us a break. It's okay. You don't have to answer, but it's a legitimate issue.
Mr. Hackett, word of advice. If a council member asks you a question, don't ever tell them what you're here to talk about. Just a word of advice.
Understood.
I understand. So, the best of your ability, if you could just answer the question.
Understood.
I'm just.
Understood.
As a friend. All right.
So, in terms of the funding source for pre-K, or how we would get enrollment up, our plan is to scale up over the next 5 years, once the pre-K program is fully funded, that we would increase the number of children receiving pre-K about 10,000 seats. At the end of the third year, we would evaluate, look at the program to make sure that we are reaching our goals and see if any modifications to the plan would need to be done in order to enhance the program and increase enrollment.
Mr. President, I'm going to just let that go. I'm just going to forget that and let you go on to the next person.
Right.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown. I'm sorry, hold on. No, wait. Did we already do Councilwoman Gim? Do Councilwoman Gim, because she has not spoken yet. Councilwoman.
Thank you so much, Mr.
You're
President. Could you, for clarity purpose, and I think I'm following a little bit with Councilman Green, make a clear explanation of the distinction between a distributor's tax, which I believe is what the administration is proposing, and a sales tax?
Yeah, there he is.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I think Mr. Dubow gave me a look and I came up here. I think what this tax is a tax on the transaction between a distributor and a retailer. And the distinction I was trying to draw before was a legal distinction. In other words, how a court would look at it. And it's very critical where the tax occurs in terms of where in the chain. And then this is between the distributor and the retailer, not the retailer and consumer, which is where sales tax occurs, and as well as how the tax is measured. Those are two legal distinctions. Here, the tax is measured with respect to the volume, so it's 3 cents per ounce, and in a sales tax is tied to the measure is the price. So those distinctions are ones that we think a court will look to determine whether it's duplicative of the sales tax.
So the burden is borne by the distributor or by the retailer? Under the ordinance is distributor. Distributor is liable for it. Correct. And so this idea that this is a grocery tax or this is a sales tax or is borne by consumers is based on what concept? I don't know. I mean, and I'm just talking about sort of legally where the liability is. Now, there's a question about how much is going to be passed through, and that, I can't predict. But in terms of where a court would be focused on
in doing the analysis.
Have the distributors spoken with the administration about how much they intend to pass on?
They haven't spoken to me, so I don't know.
Mr. Dubow, do you know? Mr. Dubow, have you had conversations with distributors?
We have had some conversations, yes.
And so for clarity, have they been explicit about how much they intend to pass on?
I think in what they're saying now, they would say that they would pass it all on. We haven't seen that in other places.
I haven't seen a distributor come in front of the public budget hearings. I've heard the grocers, I've heard consumers, I've heard people who are worried about it. I've never heard a distributor actually testify in front of the budget hearing saying that they assume the burden of the tax and they will pass it on 100%.
Right.
I guess they don't have to. So one question I had is you've been present when a soda tax has been presented before. Under Mayor Nutter, it's been presented twice. Is that accurate?
I think that's right.
Okay. So what happened when the first tax was proposed and it did not pass council? Is that correct?
It did not.
And so what was and that funding was supposed to go towards schools?
I think the second time was towards schools. I think the first time was towards the city's general fund.
And what happened, what was the revenue stream that supplemented the soda tax at that time?
I think each time it was at least partially a property tax.
That's right.
I think for the school district time, there may have been a UNO increase also.
So it's interesting because it sounds like the soda tax will be passed on to somebody no matter what.
Well, somebody, right?
Right,
Yeah.
because the soda tax is either, they can assume, the distributor has the ability to either assume the tax and has the power to distribute, has the power to determine how it goes out. This is not a tax borne by grocers onto consumers. It's not an option of the city to go to the point of sale at sales tax. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And then if the distributors choose, if this tax does not go, because we've got 2 times of having seen this tax, that it then gets passed on to the rest of us. So it goes up in our property taxes or it goes up in the UNO tax.
If we used another tax, that's right, and that's why we talked about in the testimony why we didn't want to go to another tax. But you're right, one of the differences is you can't avoid the other taxes by simply not buying something.
For me personally, I am very much pro-program. I've fought all my life to see, as many of my colleagues have, to see an enormous investment in our neighborhoods and communities. And I think I'm struggling to understand is there something particularly sacred about the soda tax industry that makes it difficult for that to happen? I mean, I feel like many of us have paid already. We've raised property taxes twice. We've raised UNO taxes twice. Is that correct?
The property tax was actually raised 4 times.
4 times. Thank you for reminding us of that.
And I think UNO was twice, I think.
UNO is twice. We passed a cigarette tax.
Correct. And increased the parking tax.
And we've increased the parking tax. And there is, did I hear Mr. Tulante say that there isn't currently the 18% tax on soda? He was mentioning that there
Yeah, he was contrasting it with other tax, yes, with liquor tax. Yeah.
Right. So I just wanted to clarify again that this is a tax on distributors. It's not a point of sales tax.
Correct.
This is a tax that's within the control of distributors.
Correct.
And that this soda tax gets passed on, pass or not, it's up to them if we pass it, whether they assume it. But if they don't pass it, likely the rest of us pay.
Either the rest of us pay or we don't have the programs.
And I think that needs to be made very clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We had a liquor by the drink tax that we enacted way before my time, and a cigarette tax way before my time. When we
Not way.
All right, well, maybe a little. When we enacted those taxes, do you recall what the projection was and what was the reality in relationship to the projection?
So for the liquor tax, I don't know exactly what the original projection were, but I think that tax has been strong over time and is still growing. So, and it's been a really steady source of revenue for the school district. Likewise, the cigarette tax has also been steady. It was a little bit below projection, but it's been steady.
Here's my question. I don't know what the number was, but if you came to city council and said, we think the cigarette tax is going to be 50 million, what did we actually produce the first year of that? And if we came to city council and said the liquor by the drink is going to be 20 million, what did we actually produce?
Yeah, the liquor by the drink, I'd have to go back. I think it was right around projection, but I'd have to go back.
Okay.
The cigarette tax, the district was projecting 60 million, and I think it came in the 50s, but I'd have to get the exact numbers.
Okay, if you could get that.
Yes.
And I just want to make sure I'm still on the same page with this. When I looked at the charts, there were two charts, I think, one from city council, one from the administration, breaking down the per half an ounce revenue generated incrementally. And if I recall, for 1 cent, it was like 58 million, and for 1.5 cents, it was 76 million. Does that seem accurate?
That sounds about right. I have to go back and look, but that sounds about right.
So, not that I'm giving an opinion if I'm in favor of the tax or not, I'm just trying to understand the math. If 1.5 cents produces 76, it doesn't make mathematical sense to add another 1.5 that only produces 14.
Another 1.5 that produces another 20.
90 or 20.
90,
Okay,
you're
so
up
say
to
19.
95, 96.
Yeah. It just seems like the increment isn't worth it. I mean, just...
It is if we want to fund the programs.
But the amount of levy that you're putting on that, it seems very heavy for the extra 19 million. That's my... In other words, I understand 1 cent's 56 or whatever. I understand 1.5 gets us to 76, but to add another 1.5 that only produces 19 doesn't seem beneficial.
It is because it funds the programs, and we need to fund the programs.
And I know that we've talked to you about this, but I just want to read this into the record, that I think diet soda is as bad as regular soda. And I just saw a picture, by the way, of somebody's teeth who drinks diet soda. It's terrible, terrible. So I think if there's a way that we could figure this thing out and if we have to go this route, diet soda is just as bad. And and I think, I'm speaking for myself, but I think everybody loves the initiatives. I think what people aren't in favor of is targeting one industry or a narrow scope. And we can broaden the base, it's going to make things a lot easier. So the broader we can make it, the better. But I think the initiatives are excellent. So I'll end with that thought in mind.
Okay.
I will say this, diet soda is a great idea because people who have more money probably drink diet soda, and you'll spread that tax around to other people. So you're leveling the playing field. But if it was up to me, I would find efficiencies in government to fund this program. I would start with the fees that we charge that we haven't changed since 1984 in the court system.
The court system fees. I think the fees actually stay within the court system, so they wouldn't help with this.
Well, we're writing a check for $56 million out of our fund for the courts, and I thought there was a law in the 1990s that said they have to be self-sufficient. So I'm not sure why we're writing that check.
There's a long history of that and our attempts not to, but we can...
I want to do the initiative. I'm just thinking that there's other ways of funding it that might be more productive. And it's not just the court system. I think it's also the sheriff's department could be more fees there.
Yeah, I think they're actually looking at that now.
L&I probably have, I think the expediter fee, because I'm familiar with this, hasn't changed in 20 years at L&I.
Yeah, although L&I has changed a lot of their fees. We looked at those fees within the last few years, but it's something that we continue to do. We always look at the fees. The fees can't be more than your costs.
Right.
So we look at the fees, and if they haven't been increased in a while, and there's room to increase them, we do that.
So I asked this question this morning from Revenue. Who's in charge of monitoring the fees for the city?
So typically, it would be budget and finance working with the departments, and it's part of the budget review process every year. There are discussions about fees.
So that's a gold mine. You guys can go to work on that one.
I'm Anna Adams, I'm the budget director. So actually, when we meet with the departments, one of our big questions is not only our forecasts for the locally generated non-tax revenues accurate, are we on track, what's going on with them, but is there any room to increase fees? Because we're always looking for ways that we can do things to help fund some of the other programs that we want to do, as well as to find room for everything else that we need to do in the budget. So we actually make that as a big part of our budget process, and we also, when departments have requested new funding for specific initiatives, we call it the justification process, we also ask them to look at what's going on with their fees and everything as part of that structure. But we are, I think there will be some conversations about particular fees that we may be looking to do in the fall, so we'll talk to council about some of those.
Well, we'll say this. I am very hopeful that next year we're going to collect a lot more real estate taxes, because I'm not going to stop till we collect that money. So we're going to collect the money, and we'll have more money for that next year. So thank you very much. You're doing a great job, in my opinion. You're very cooperative, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gentlemen and lady, the two issues on the soda tax that seem to get discussed the most, other than the size of it, are the legality, either on uniformity and on nexus, going outside the state or even outside the county. On the size of it, so that's one issue that comes up. I haven't had any discussions directly with the soda industry, but if I were the soda industry, I'd be as concerned about a half a cent or a quarter cent as I would be about 3 cents. So I want to move to the legal issues. On the uniformity, I think everybody understands what uniform means. It's a question of how it's interpreted in a court of law. But with nexus, particularly going outside the state, I'll start with that, from a distributor where we're taxing a distributor outside the state, is there any examples that are apples and apples that you can explain to me where we tax something outside the state where our reach is to the city borders in some cases and to larger borders of Pennsylvania in other cases, but where we go outside and tax an activity in another state directly? I just want to know what
I'll
you're
look into
using
that.
as your...
I don't have one off the top of my head, but our analysis was that any distributor that's going to be subject to this tax is doing so voluntarily. In other words, the way the tax works is a retailer notifies a distributor, I'm from Philadelphia, and there's this law that says you're going to be subject to this. Can you please confirm you received this notice, go get registered or licensed, and then once you're registered or licensed, I know I have to buy from you. You know, I've discharged my obligations.
Is there anybody else that we tax in such a fashion where they get, because I'm following where you're coming from, but my question is, one, it doesn't seem like there's a concrete example, apples and apples, but the concept of the voluntariness, you can't complain because you didn't have to do it. Do we have anything like that we do where people get notified that we're taxing you even though you're outside the state, not otherwise subject to it, but if you don't do business with us, you don't have to pay it with our city, vendors and businesses. I'm just trying to get an idea where the nexus argument comes from. Even if it's voluntary, is this the first time we would have ever done that? I guess maybe that's...
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I'll look into that.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't know one way or the other.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Council President.
Welcome.
And good afternoon. Some question on, I guess, that Mr. Dubow. You know, you hear a lot about, you know, rumors of decreasing non-wage tax, stopping reductions, increasing real estate taxes, and we were just reminded that, you know, the past several years, raised real estate 4 times. We increased use and occupancy tax. We provided exemptions for small businesses, which I think is great, and I think we all champion providing some relief, through the whole new property tax evaluation where commercial quarter businesses received, $2,000 exemption. Some of that included BERT. So I'm sure in your analysis, trying to figure out how to fund these programs, and I believe in the programs and what we need to do. I think we have an opportunity to actually create our own economy through these efforts. But some of the conversation also has been, taxes across the board, on business taxes. And so can you tell me the pros and cons on, blanket across the board taxes on businesses after the mayor in this body has already made a decision to not increase business taxes for once, to have a gradual decline in our wage tax and our business taxes. What would it do if you had a across the board business tax increase, and what would it do to the exemptions for some of the smaller businesses, which, by the way, I think make up like 85% of Philadelphia business owners, especially in my district?
Yeah, so a couple of answers. One, both of the tax reform commissions concluded that wage and business taxes, when they're increasing, cost us jobs, and that conversely, decreasing them helps create jobs. We wanted to stay away from increases in either one of those areas. Also, when you talked about the exemption in small businesses, and the Revenue Department's analysis showed that there are over 65,000 businesses, small businesses, revenues under 100,000 in the city of Philadelphia, that won't have to pay the tax at all because of the exemption. And so if you got rid of the exemption, they would all have to come back onto the rolls. So we think that's a really big positive of the business tax reduction program.
So come back on the rolls, meaning
they'd have to pay again if we got rid of the exemption.
Start paying taxes again?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and I would imagine through a lot of collaboration and trying to figure out how to move forward, that wasn't in...
Correct. We wanted to stay away from those broad-based taxes because of the impact we think they have on jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Real quick, Mr. Bowe, actually unrelated to sugar, but with respects to what we hope will be a significant revenue stream once we ultimately get our land values and our appraisals of commercial real estate corrected. Right. Do you have a sense of the projected revenues?
Yeah, I'm going to ask.
And if so, what is that?
Yeah.
And if so, what is that based on?
So we build into the plan a growth in based on the OPA's schedule that they've laid out for when they're doing the commercial real estate, and then after that they'll do the whole city again. We built into the plan a projection in additional taxable market value that flows through our revenue model. And so and I can get the numbers, but I think we got to, when they do the commercial values, the commercial taxable market values will grow by 3%, and that flows through our revenue projection models.
What is that based off of?
It's
based we've all acknowledged, and maybe you guys not publicly, that our ability to evaluate commercial real estate is limited at best. So what are you projecting? And I talked to my friend and colleague, Mr. Down, he could tick off like 10, 20, 30 commercial properties of significant size, and it's clear that those assessments are not accurate. Subsequently, the revenues generated from those. So what are you basing that off of? We haven't even done the most obvious inaccurate appraisals on commercial real estate. What are we basing it on?
It's based on conversations with the assessment office, based on their opinion on what's likely to happen with the taxable real estate once they do their commercial assessments. I think we may err on the side of being conservative, but I don't think we're that conservative based on what's happened in the last few years.
All right, I'm saying some serious miscalculations in our appraisal process, and I'm assuming that there will be a significantly amount more as it relates to revenues generated once we get this corrected. And the fact that we don't have in place a mechanism that will give us accurate appraisals, thereby accurate tax bills for significant commercial buildings, and not to mention the smaller ones. I don't know where we're getting these projections from.
Both the smaller properties as well as the larger commercial properties. So this is the average growth in
So
taxable
you're
market
anticipating that
value.
the smallers might go down?
It's based on just an assumption of what will happen to the taxable market value, and it will grow by 3% as a whole. But it's not. We don't break out the large commercial properties versus the small commercial properties. We don't have that level of data.
Okay. All right. And the conversation around, I know I'm going to upset some people about changing the structure or the process established with UNO. We've had that offline conversation about right now the onus is on us to determine what's taxable usage, where we essentially,
It does,
as opposed to the responsibility of the property owner to indicate what portion of their real estate is not being utilized?
It works the flip way of what we discussed last time, but Mr. Breslin can describe it.
Okay, I just want to.
Frank Breslin, Revenue Commissioner. Yeah, what we do is when we send the bill for UNO tax, it starts with what we call max tax, the maximum tax, the full value
for that property based on square footage. Okay.
Then the taxpayer fills in any exemptions, vacant, residential, whatever, and comes down to their calculation of the tax due, and then remits that to us.
Okay, and is that all? Do we do that with all businesses?
Yes, and all property subject to UNO. That's the way
including
it's calculated.
universities, all of the nonprofit institutions, because that's where it seems to be some question.
To anyone who's subject to the tax. So there are exclusions from the tax. So whoever.
So we're saying that because the university, quote unquote, is not subject to the tax, real estate tax, because they're in nonprofit status, we don't approach it in that way?
They would still get, if the property is considered taxable, they would still get a bill and then calculate which portion is taxable. So properties that are owned by universities can still be taxable if there's commercial activity going on in that property. If there's retail space.
My question is that we use the same process with the institutions, university hospitals, that we send them a tax bill based on their taxable square footage, and then they have to tell us what portions of their property.
We do, but I think the distinction is there are certain properties that are just marked as exempt, completely exempt, and because they're in that status all the time and they're pulled out of our billing system, so then they would not receive a bill until some change where they become.
So the church is clearly not.
Exactly. So they wouldn't.
Commercial activity.
They wouldn't get a bill at all unless we had some indication that there was commercial activity taking place there. In which case we would set them back up, then they would get that bill and they would have to fill it out.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for that. This right? Councilwoman, I think. Councilman Squill is here. Okay, let me see. Yeah, we got some stuff going on up here. I'll get it together. Chair recognizes Councilman Squill. I know they're trying to.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You all are trying to trick me with jumping in those chairs. It's all right.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I know we talked about delinquent taxes, and there is some delinquent tax dollars into the 5-year plan, how we're collecting that. And I notice now, we've been getting a lot of issues in our office with people being taken to court for sweep violations. So what happens is they had a sweep violation last year or something and never received notices. We have about 10 of them now in place, and they are now going to municipal court for it's end up being like a $600 or $650 in fines. It's, to me, we want to collect delinquent taxes, but we want to also collect fines and fees that are associated with issues in the city. But when it comes to this point, what we do is we're attacking these residents and who are not able to pay it, and then bringing it to municipal court level to pay a sweeps violation of $50, and it ends up going to $600 or $380 or something like that. And then if that doesn't happen, which they don't usually go to court, and then it goes to a collection agency. We need to do a better job, I think, of in-house collection and going after these folks in-house or working with somebody to collect and take a piece of it. I think the avenue that we're taking now, and this is fairly new, this must be within the last 6 months, is that true, that we're doing this? Does anybody know?
So sweeps isn't,
It's collected by revenue, though?
it's actually...
Does anybody know?
Oh, wait.
They don't know. All right, well, maybe offline we'll bring this up, and I'll try to figure out how we approach these subjects. How do we get them out of the court, to get them to pay their fines that they owe and not these exorbitant prices that are associated with these fines. Because I'm a big advocate of collected delinquent fines, fees, and taxes, but this just seems like overkill, and I think we're sending the wrong message to
We're happy to have
regular
that
everyday
discussion
folks.
and make sure the right people are there. Cool.
All right, thank you very much. Also, on the real estate tax, and I know we talked about the land value tax assessments of this year, and the $14 million, that was added into the 5-year plan? Was that into this year's budget?
Correct. So it's $14 million a year. So over the full plan, it's about $70 million.
$70 million?
Over 5 years.
Over 5 years. But that money has been included in this year's budget already?
It has.
And for the revenue for the programs, pre-K, community schools, rebuild, the number that was quoted was close to 90 million, is that correct?
About 96 million when fully implemented. The first year is half a year, so it's about half of that.
So the first year is approximately
48.
48.
Yep.
Yeah, 48.
And then you need 90 million a year after
96.
that? 96. And so if that value is reached, you could do everything in the plan. If it's not reached, who decides what programs and how do you move forward with? Does that come after the budget session?
Well, I think we'd have to decide kind of if we didn't get the full amount, you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we'd have to start figuring it out then, once we knew what the amount was.
And then you would decide if it's so many community schools, how much to rebuild.
But what we wouldn't be able to do.
How you go off with the pre-K.
That's right.
All right, thank you very much.
Good afternoon. So let me repeat what I think I heard. You said that in the first year you expect to yield about $48 million.
Because it will be in place for half a year.
Okay.
Yes.
So you should know in the homework that was done by my staff and technical staff with the Baltimore model, the yield was about $43 million in the first year. With that, if both taxes brought in the same amount, which tax would be less regressive, the sugar-sweetened beverage or the container tax, in your view?
Probably the container tax, because it'd be harder to avoid.
Okay. And with the
more
issue
aggressive,
of
right.
financial sustainability being a real factor in this debate, which tax would be more financially sustainable?
So I probably want to look at the results of what happened in Baltimore before answering that, to see what that looked like and to see whether there are other examples and see what happened over time.
Okay, that's reasonable. Very well. Let's move on to Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just feel compelled to put some of this debate in a historical context. In the 8 years that I've been here in council, there's been a lot of work done with the administration around not limiting, but being progressive in our taxation and giving our limited resources, being very focused about who we want to support and provide relief for. And so the $217 million in BERT and other wage reductions are legislated because that has been the hard decisions that this council makes every single year when we approve not only our tax bills but our 5-year plan. I think it's important to say that. I also want to say that the one thing that I've learned in the 8 years I've been here is that a robust debate is not about one option.
That's right.
And as you stated, Councilwoman, looking at what all those options are is part of our process. And I want to caution folks to say that, you know, we can't do real estate, we can't do UNO, because next year, and I think I want to, not taking the words out of Councilwoman Blackwell's mouth, what I want to know is what do we do next year with the projected deficit the school district have for those of us who love children? And so what is the administration's thought about the ask that is projected to be made by the school district next year with their projected $100 million shortfall?
Actually, for both FY17 and FY18, the district is projecting positive fund balances. So it doesn't project a negative until FY...
That's based on the state budget being approved as
It's based on
proposed.
what's already been approved.
What's already been approved.
So they don't project deficits until FY19.
Right.
By that point, there'll have been 2 additional state budgets.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were talking about before, we'd really like to see what happens with those state budgets before deciding what we would do with the school district.
So in terms of options, in those, let's talk about year 19 since you bring it up. In year 19, our projected wage tax reductions increased to 35 million, I believe, and then 65 million.
In FY19, we project that the cost of the wage tax reductions is about 34 million.
Why do they jump up so high from one year to the next?
It was based on kind of when you do the amount of rate reductions that we put in, we could felt like in FY19 we had a little bit more
This is
room.
an increased rate reduction than the one from the previous 5-year plan.
It's actually, I think, not from the previous 5-year plan. It's ends up being about the same. It just we have fairly low rate reductions in the first couple of years, and we start ramping up when we have a little bit more of a stable fund balance and we can afford a little bit more.
And why have we done that every time we do a 5-year plan?
This is my first year doing this, so I can't.
Why have we had more room?
Why have we always kicked those reductions down the road?
It really does relate to kind of where our fund balances are. And our fund balances are pretty tight, so we can't afford more early on.
So,
and the more you do early on, the more all of those kick through for every year of the plan, right? So if you have a really high reduction the first year, it's going to multiply by 5.
I wanted to bring the health commissioner back up because he made a statement at the end of my last questioning that I want to.
Yes.
Hello. We haven't had a chance to meet yet. When I was talking about some of our feeding programs and the fact that the options that were provided in our senior centers, you said, what did you say to me?
I asked whether water was available.
That is part of the problem with this debate. There is this elitist view that the people that we're highlighting in this map have options, and if not, they can drink water. And that only those folks who can afford sugary drinks will be the ones who have a choice to afford it. And if not, you just have water. And I can tell you that in the discussions that I have in the community, it is that approach, that attitude of people choose to drink sugar drinks as opposed to the limited options in their neighborhoods is part of the problem with this debate. And so I just wanted to let you know that is part of the challenge and what I see part of the problem with this tax. Not only that it's regressive and everything else, but this approach that people have all these options is not a good one. And I don't think that, as someone who's a healthcare official, well, I didn't like your response.
Okay, I apologize. I will just say, though, that we would recommend that everybody drink water, whether they're high income, low income.
I drink water. My son drinks a lot of water. My husband is a health nut, and juices. And I can tell you that everything that they drink has some minor level of sugar. And water is just not enough. And the issue of choices, because, we keep making this health thing around choices, is for poor people, and I'm speaking on, this math reflects me, reflects the people I represent. It's not cool. It's not cool for us to say people have choices, because poor people don't have those choices. That those folks who can afford to drink an orange juice. If you did a comparable analysis about the person who buys the iced tea versus the orange juice, the pricing is almost double in those neighborhoods. And that's the core of this debate about who's going to pay for what we all agree are very important initiatives, and that shouldn't be taken lightly.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Sounds like we're headed towards a tobacco settlement in the near future. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Was my time up?
Yes, by several minutes. I don't think we're going anywhere anytime soon. Have a Snickers bar.
I want her clock on mine. Listen, so for the record, my grandmother made the best lemonade ever. It did not require a whole bunch, but she made it with a lot of love, and we drank it all the time. And we lived, and I was born poor before a whole bunch of folks, so we've had options. A couple of questions. What?
We could try and help.
May I borrow them back for a second? Thank you. I was wondering where you went.
We're having a nice chat, too.
Yeah, well, we can have one public. So there's a lot of debate or discussion about predictability of funding. In one breath, I hear predictability so that we can maintain a fund for young people, for libraries, for rec centers. And then I hear that consumption is going to make it drop off. And then I hear the economic theory that somehow, GNP is going to be shattered as we know it in Philadelphia. And so I'm really confused. But let me ask a couple of questions, because this sounds reminiscent of the debate we had on the cigarette tax and how there was going to be mass exodus out of and that, the inner city economics was going to collapse, and that people were going to make major cigarette runs into that would somehow trigger. I don't get it. Tell me, was the impact of the cigarette tax as drastic as it was predicted, and what was the result by way of revenue?
So I don't believe that either that or the liquor tax, that either one had the dramatic negative impact that were projected. I think both of those taxes have provided stable revenues for the school district over time.
To the degree that we don't have to go back to real estate this year or next.
Right, correct.
Okay. All right. I will end on that.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
So, to further this discussion, the AVI resulted in surprisingly reduced taxes for our biggest commercial buildings. And they have come back recently to say that they are for bifurcating real estate taxes, with the caveat that the tax be no more than 15%. And, I'm not clear, based on this principle that we're discussing, why that would be. Why would we, if if all these new modern buildings that are 3.9 billion and all that, they're being developed, they would have prime rental and use and occupancy. Why would we limit that to 15% when 15% does not reach the full value of those large commercial properties? When we're trying to get money elsewhere, why don't we just do bifurcated real estate tax and grade it according to the value of the property?
So let me first say that the 15%
cap,
not our proposal. So, I mean, I think that's definitely something worth discussing.
Okay.
And I'd say that, also want to say that the administration favors the idea of a bifurcated rate. But to get there, you need to amend the state constitution.
Right.
And that's a multi-year process. So the soonest you could see something from that would probably be 3 years from now.
Okay. So the last time we talked about this, the administration was supporting a 15% cap. And, but I'm glad to hear that it's not done deal, it's all theoretical.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, good. So what about since we're not taxing everyone evenly, we're looking at alternatives. So alternatives, there are many kind of incentives. And I'm not necessarily favoring any of these, but I'd just like to know why have we not, why isn't there a consideration of other taxes if you're going to create incentives? For example, we have new buildings and we like those, and we have old rundown buildings, and why don't we create different classes of city taxes to deal with those? Or for example, new technologies that leave entire groups of businesses not paying any taxes at all in our city.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Like, in other words, if you're not going to have a broad-based tax, and you're going to target something that's already paying taxes and 2% above and everything else, have you looked at other industries that are not paying any taxes?
So for the most part, and I probably should actually ask the city solicitor to answer this, because I think part of the answer is a uniformity clause answer. But I think I actually saw him walking out, but I think that's really a question for him, because I think we would be precluded from doing what you're talking about.
But for use and occupancy, we set the rate for use and occupancy. Don't we set the rate for parking tax and everything like that?
Sure, if you're asking why didn't we increase UNO or parking?
I'm saying, why wouldn't you
because for
different
UNO and
classes?
parking to generate enough revenue, you would have to have really dramatic increases. And we thought that level of increase would be too large and have too negative an impact.
Okay, so there's not any business being run in Philadelphia that is growing, that is just avoiding paying any taxes at all? You cannot think of one?
No, we can't have a different rate for a specific business.
I'm not saying a different rate. I'm saying
Right.
they're not paying any
So
taxes whatsoever.
No, there aren't businesses that are not.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Squilla. Councilwoman, oh, here he is. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe this was Councilwoman Bass's turn, but I'll just take it real quick. And a lot of people have gone back to the delinquent taxes, and I know Councilman Dom has talked about the collection process. Do we have an actual number that we could state or put on the books of delinquent real estate taxes, not so much as far as water and fees and things like that?
You're talking about what's collectible or what's outstanding?
Well, If it's not collectible, what are we doing with it? You could say what's out there, what do we think's collectible, and why are we just keeping numbers out there?
Yeah, and I'll hand it over to Commissioner Breslin and also say that Revenue sent over a collection strategy document today that kind of lays out in detail what they're doing, and there's a large portion of that that's about the real estate tax, but let me turn it over to the Commissioner.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so the number that we've been talking about, and I think numbers have changed a little bit, but the number that has been discussed is from December, and the real estate active delinquency was $235 million.
235 million is active delinquency. Does that mean 10 years or less? What's active?
Yes.
10 years or less?
Yes.
And how much is 10 years or more?
I'm sorry, repeat that, please.
How much of the delinquency is older than 10 years?
That is the inactive, I don't know that number, I have it.
While he's looking that up, I should say in the 5-year plan and in the budget, we assume, I think it's about 45 million of delinquent collections on the property tax on the city side each year, and so it's probably about 50 million on the school district side, so we're assuming about 90 million or so. And I think that number is actually, what the collection is actually shown in that document we sent over.
So we're going to say we're going to collect about $90 million a year in delinquent taxes over and above what our regular tax collection is. Is that correct?
Over the current collections.
Right. And our current rate of collection is, what do we project at that at during the budget?
94%.
94%?
For the property tax within the year that it's due. But I
That's right.
should let you answer.
That's correct, 94% within the tax, within the year that the tax is due, and the number you were asking for is around 53 million.
Oh, it's only 53 million that is uncollectible or over 10 years?
Yes.
Okay. So we're saying in real estate, our numbers, I guess the city numbers, compared to maybe the controller's numbers that are off, and I know there's a discrepancy there. But we're saying that if you combined all the total real estate taxes due, it's still less than 300 million.
Yeah.
Right? It's 200 and...
I think the difference between the controller's numbers and ours, I'm imagining that their numbers include interest and penalty, and Commissioner's talking about principal.
I'm talking about principal only.
Okay, so if we make these deals, we're not going to collect interest and penalty off anybody then moving forward,
Some portion of it, but it's likely that we wouldn't collect all of the interest and penalty due.
And they're able to make those arrangements with the Revenue Department at this point.
That's correct.
All right, so then...
And it's important just to, when we talk about these numbers, to note that although these are the delinquency figures, a lot of these are in a status that they may be compliant. They could be in a payment agreement. They could be in bankruptcy. They could be in some status that prevents us from taking any action.
Oh, so even our payment agreements are considered delinquent status?
In these
and those numbers are in there?
Those numbers are in here.
Is there a way to break them up?
We do have another report that breaks down these, when we can get that to you, by enforcement status, so you can see how many are in bankruptcy, how many are in payment agreements, and other statuses.
Well, that way.
Yes, it's in the document that we sent over.
That's in that one you sent today?
It is.
And that would be great then, because I mean, that helps tremendously to see what is actually collectible and other ones that are showing delinquent, but they're actually paying them, but yet they're showing delinquent. So it would be great to have it. So it's broken down in people who aren't paying, people that are still delinquent but in payment plans, and then people who aren't paying but maybe because they're bankrupt.
Correct.
And it's in a bankruptcy holding.
Yeah, while they're in bankruptcy, we can't bill them or take any collection action.
That would be great. And again, is there a separate number then as far as water and sewer bills and
Yes, there is. Now, that was not in that document, but we can get that for you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
It's up to you, Matt.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Toppenberg.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chairman, it's appreciated very much. I'd like to ask some questions on dividends. Can you shed some light on how the city identifies those who receive dividends and interest and capital gains or gambling income?
Yeah, so those incomes are taxable for the school income tax.
Correct.
So as a compliance initiative, we use third-party data, either from the Internal Revenue Service or from the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue to find out what Philadelphia residents have those types of taxable income. Then we compare it to our database for school income tax to see if they're paying, and if they're not, we notify them about their tax liability.
Now, with that interest, I've looked at some things that constituents have given me. It's over 50%. And what is that based on? That's a lot of interest, 50% interest.
Oh, the interest rate is...
on the tax.
Well, that would be a combination of interest and penalty.
Yeah, but many of these people, get these notices, and they're several years old. I'm actually looking at one now that has actually in the worksheet that was given, this is the first time they've received it, unless you can prove otherwise. I'd like to hear that story. From 2009 to 2014, with the interest in the beginning years being nearly 50%, and then going down to 25%, but still it's a rather high rate. And had there been an earlier attempt to collect this bill, they would have gotten the money earlier, quicker, and I think the person would have paid.
Right, so some of the limitation there is that it takes us a while to get the information from the third-party sources. So by the time IRS processes their information, does what they need to do with it, sends it to us, it's generally, and I'm averaging, about 2 years old before we get it. And then when we do get it, our statute of limitations is 6 years. Well, actually, because these are non-filers, there is no statute of limitations. But what we do through our compliance program is we limit the look-back period to the 6 years, and then we offer abatement, and I'm not remembering with this current program right now what the level of abatement is, but there's some level of penalty abatement built in that if a taxpayer complies with the notice, they get a degree of penalty abatement.
Having a tax bill, date back to 2009, 2010, that's not good. And even 3 years, I mean, I'd like to hear, they're not here, the IRS. I mean, this is a day of modern technology where you ought to be able to get these records, I'd certainly say within a year, maybe 2, and then to come and try to collect a bill that's 2009, and you're giving some senior citizens heart attacks is what you're doing.
I understand, yeah, that it's...
I mean, has your department ever tried to rectify this, or?
There's been several efforts over the years. Some as simple as just publicizing, trying greater outreach about the tax to get the word out for school income tax. With what we do is when we see people that through our data matching that have smaller amounts due, so that it doesn't build into something so significant, rather than send them a bill, we generally send them a notice that just says, we have an indication that you may be subject to this tax. So please speak to your tax preparer, or give us a call. So we try to do outreach around it. It has been a challenge, and we repeatedly hear from taxpayers that it's a tax that they're just not aware of.
Well, yeah, I think one, there has to be some education. I'd hate to say how much money is on the table for that.
What's also surprising in our research with this is how many of the people that aren't aware of it have professional tax preparers. So, and we reach out to that community. We do seminars throughout the year, cover all of our taxes, especially the Philadelphia, but we also go to suburban because we realize that's where there may be less awareness of Philly taxes. So we go out and do those. We do one out in Springfield, Delaware County. We actually do some in New Jersey. So we really do try to make the outreach. So it's been a challenge for us.
Well, maybe we can help if we know what what the shortcomings are. Maybe we could help, with that challenge. I mean, and I will have to say, many of these people, these dollars are from a little bit of income that they've had and they put over the years. Maybe they worked for Sears Roebuck and they got Sears Roebuck stock or whatever. I know my aunt worked for Boeing, and although she doesn't live in Philadelphia, she's not eligible for this tax. But the fact of the matter is, we need to get the word out, so when a senior citizen gets this, and I think many of them are, they don't get a coronary arrest for what is owed, because most folks want to pay their tax obligation. If not, they are smart enough to hire an accountant to try to get around it, but the fact is they do. And then waiting, from 2009, 2010, and I have the facts in front of me, is a long time.
Yeah. Well, we go back to that. I'm not sure what the base year off that is, but it's probably a much more recent. We're in 2016. That's probably 2012, 2013 data that we used, but we go back to that 6-year look back. But keep in mind that there actually is no statute, so we're limiting.
I understand that, but we got to get a better way to do this. And I know this isn't really the appropriate time to continue to hammer on this, but maybe at some point when things are a little different in these chambers as far as time, we can actually do a resolution on this, and you come before us and explain how this is done.
Well, one piece that I left out that I think is key is that we've talked about the data warehouse that will be implemented in February of next year. And one of the processes that we're trying to accommodate, that should help us to get this information on our side to do our processing quicker. We can't speed up the IRS. That's a scheduled release. So what happens is the IRS at the same time every year releases this information to us. And we can't speed up that process. But once we get it, we can then speed up our process with the data warehouse. And our ultimate goal with this is to get to a point where we're doing 1 year at a time, so that we're kind of so current that the only year we're dealing with is the year's data that we got, and everyone's kind of up to date. And then it won't be the big impact of, that heart attack bill.
That is a great goal, and I think speaking for my colleagues, I think we would all love to see you attain that goal, because there's a lot of money on the table and we can't collect, and if we had them, we might not have to raise other taxes. Right. I mean, it is very important. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gill.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dubow, I just wanted to clarify again, because I know it came up. The cigarette tax is a fundamentally different tax than what is being proposed. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
So again, the tax that's being proposed is a distributor's tax.
That's right.
It's a tax on distributors.
Yep, and this is also a tax we'll collect, the cigarette tax the state collects.
That's correct. Okay, and that if wealthy distributors choose to pass on the tax, then it's their choice to avoid their tax obligation in that sense.
Correct.
Okay, and I think it's really important because we are trying to think about progressive tax policies and to think about how they work, and it is difficult when we look at wealthy entities and how we look at them, and I think that the attempt to try and take a look at looking at a variety of things as we have distributed taxes across a whole variety of areas as an alternative to particular taxes, that it's important to understand that we are exploring a whole group of alternatives. We have traditionally done that, and that there are lots of interpretations about how we look at progressive taxation. I also thought that it was important it's my understanding that the School District of Philadelphia does not provide sugary beverages at all to its students. I was one of the groups of parents in the mid-2000s who advocated to take out soda out of the schools, make sure that those weren't vendors, and it's my understanding, therefore, that all fruit juices that are provided at the school district level do not have sugar added, that they are all natural fruit juices. So
would not be subject to the tax.
I believe that the provider also supports our rec centers and our after-school programs and those kinds of things. So I think that they share the same providers. So
thank you.
I hope that helps clarify it a little bit. And I do think it's important because I do care a lot about the property tax, as I've said before, and I said earlier today, property taxes in UNO in particular are the bread and butter of school district financing. It's essential money. It's the only money that school kids don't have to beg, crawl, and plead for. Every other thing, we literally bleed for that money. through other kinds of alternatives. When we open up other types of funding streams for the district, we incur a lot of risk when we open up state, allow the state to determine how they want to send revenue our way. So, I do hold those taxes very carefully, and I'm very thoughtful about them. Have advocated that when school district funding occurs, that certainly we do go to our primary revenue streams and that we're responsible at it. I just want us to be really thoughtful and careful about how we look at it and utilize it.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you. And I know we have other things to testify. I just want to make sure that I'm clear about my question. I wanted us as a city to make sure that we had done due diligence and we had asked all of our providers about what the impacts were on the money. I want to ask the administration to provide for me kind of a departmental by department a reassessment and realignment, like where you feel you've made the most significant changes to realign the budgets to the mayor's priority. You used the fire department as an example, so if I could get that. So everywhere where we touch children and families, how we've realigned to support the mayor's priorities that you've outlined and you feel that you've gone through. If you could provide that for the chair before we finish this budget process, that would be important. I'll leave my rest of my questions because I know we have the community schools and all those folks coming. So I'll leave the rest of that for that.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions I wanted to ask. They might be more revenue related than finance, but on the wage taxes that are delinquent of $44 million, are those basically people who work in companies that don't pay the wage tax? Because my understanding is like payroll services deduct these taxes and pay them to the city.
Yes, they would be companies, that's companies that owe the wage tax. Yes, so they could be, that could have been derived through audit assessments. It could be that they remitted tax returns and didn't pay, but yes, it would be on companies.
So it's not individuals, basically. It's companies that haven't remitted?
Correct.
So that's $44 million, which includes the interest and penalties. I'm going to go back to what I asked this morning about the BERT delinquency of $130 million. Maybe Rob can answer this one. No, I don't know. Is that something we could actually monetize, sell that delinquency to somebody and get the cash for it?
My assumption is that probably with any one of those streams of delinquencies that we could monetize it, and the question is how much someone's willing to pay for it, right. And whether what they're willing to pay for it makes it worthwhile for us.
Do we have a process to see if we can put that out there to see if it's something we should be doing?
We can develop a process. We have not been doing that other than with the property tax, but we can do that.
Okay. I mean, my experience is that if a third party is doing the collection work, they're going to collect it probably very aggressively.
And we do use private firms for collections. Yeah. It's a different question from securitizing, but right. We do use private firms for collections on the BERT.
And the other thing I just wanted to reiterate, because I heard it this morning and I was surprised, that of the delinquent taxes that we have, 22% are owner-occupied and 78% are either commercial or investors. It's amazing.
Right. Commercial, industrial.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Before we get finished with this panel, does any other member have any questions on revenue, tax bills? Well, thank you. Thank you for you joining us here today. Next, if we could call, we're on callbacks again. I'd like to ask that the Department of Education please approach. Excuse me, we will be taking a short break. We're going to give a few people a chance to get ready for the next panel. Okay. All right, so we will take a short break and be back real soon. Thanks. Well, thank you all. We have callbacks for Department of Education, and if anybody's here from the Managing Director's office to answer any questions on callbacks regarding rebuild, we ask you to hang in there for a little bit longer. And with that, we're going to convene our committee of whole on the callbacks, starting with the Department of Education and preschool, pre-K, and community schools. So are there any members that have any questions they wish to ask on the callbacks? Well, thank you so much for coming back on the callbacks. Is there any members, before I call up the Managing Director's office regarding rebuild, does any members have any questions on callbacks for rebuild or the Managing Director's office in general? Okay, well, this is a first. Well, thank you for the callbacks. We will be in touch. Give me one moment here so we can have the official ending of our council, the whole. All right, so there being no further questions on any of the callbacks to the Department of Education and the Managing Director's office regarding rebuild, this committee will stand in a recess until Tuesday, May 17th at 10 a.m., at which time we will reconvene in room 400. So thank you all for your time today.